lovely today to understand law and order on screen and off screen with a jugalbandi between a distinguished IPS officer and India's foremost crime writer. So glad to be here with you, Rema and Hussain, and for the conversation that we'll have post the presentation. Thanks very much also to the audience. If you are still able to tune into online talks 6 months into the lockdown, we know you're special. Um, Someone said to me the other day that the conversation of police on and off screen is very interesting and makes for a great panel topic. But why is it important? And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, that we know through countless studies over time that entertainment really does influence us. When you watch something on screen, it consciously or subconsciously affects your perception of that issue or that topic or that person in real life. Two is that the citizen police relationship is not exactly in a honeymoon phase right now. Whether you take, something like the Black Lives Matter movement globally, whether you take the unfortunate Jairaj and Benix case that happened in India earlier this year. Just this morning, there was in the news an incident of a cop dragging a differently abled man. There was also news of how many police officers have died on the front line of COVID. Um, you know, as citizens, we are probably not half as empathetic to the police's very tough working conditions. But third, and I think important in this intersection of entertainment and change, is that when we talk about the media as the fourth pillar of democracy, I'm not sure we're thinking necessarily of entertainment within that. Yet today, entertainment, is the form of media we spend so much of our time and attention on. The average Indian spends between 2 to 3 hours a day on on entertainment consumption. So maybe we shouldn't let entertainment off the hook too easily. Movies and web series can be, a great force of democracy building, or the opposite. One of the things we do at Civic Studios, in addition to producing content on themes of democracy, is that we study our current entertainment and how our judiciary, government, and public institutions and the actors working within them are portrayed on screen. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to take you through some of these findings with regards to law and order on screen. We have the very helpful tech team over at Newslaundry who's going to be coordinating the presentations. I think we can start with that. So, we'll start with a study that we did last year in which we looked at a sample of recent police and courtroom drama movies, TV shows, and web series from 2015 to 2018. In this sample, we coded for all the characters, plot points, and dialogues. But because we wanted to also go further and know how this actually influenced the audience, we did a survey with audiences that had watched those films or TV shows or web series to see the difference in perception that they had versus the audience who hadn't watched them. In the next slide, what we see is that one of the things that we coded for was the types of crimes. Now, what we found is that 37%, or the largest segment of the types of crimes, were vigilante killings. And most of these were, glorifying this approach as a form of justice. If you think of Simba, Singham, Mardani. Now, does this glorification of vigilantism actually have an effect on audiences? In the next slide, if we go to, we see the answer is yes. Based on the audience impact study, we saw that a greater share of those who had watched Simba, which is a movie in the stream of the Rohit Shetty police movies, and there's a scene in which it expresses quite outright support for fake encounters and police vigilantism to catch culprits. And what we saw is that audiences who had watched the movie had a much higher support than audiences who hadn't in real life for the same form of justice. This is, in a country where justice is slow, it is a complex question. But in the long term, how does this affect our respect for law and order in India? What we see in the next slide is that viewers of the movie State versus Jolly LLB 2, I don't know how many fans we have of this movie here, but it was the Akshay Kumar movie, and it had a PIL used as a key plot point in which Jolly the lawyer is able to access justice. Now, again, people who had watched Jolly LLB2 had a higher awareness for what a PIL is than people who didn't. So it's a small piece of evidence that entertainment can serve as a tool of knowledge and awareness about our democratic processes. In the next slide, based on an analysis of verbal references made by the characters, it was seen that the institutions are most often referred to as inefficient or some variation of the word or expression of inefficient. And in the next slide after that, we see similarly, that's also the case with trust. Most of the references show characters or dialogues expressing low trust in the legal system. Now, we know that when trust in public institutions is low, civic participation suffers. We don't feel like there's worth in investing our time and energy in them, and ultimately so does the quality of democracy. There's another aspect of on-screen representation that we thought is very important to look at. So if we go to the next slide, what we've done in this study is we wanted to look at how much space are women and marginalized castes given. Democracies need to be inclusive to function. And I think the cartoon in the following slide, in the next one, sums up one of the reasons why. If the person designing the policy is different from the person using the policy won't work. In the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about the methodology we used to look at this study. Now, we looked at the 125 box office top ranking movies from the last years, and we picked out 56 that were about law and order from this. Sarthak Bhatia and his team at Newslaundry have painstakingly coded the gender and caste of every law enforcement character in these movies. So from a constable to a commissioner, but also to the raw CBI, any characters related to these forces or agencies. The method of how the caste coding is done in this is fairly complex. It was done using a probability analysis linked to a database of 60,000 surnames and their correlating castes. I won't go too much into detail on that here, but if anybody has more questions, we can always take that offline. There's also a chat box for questions below your live stream, so you can also leave questions there that we'll come back to. Before we go into the on-screen representation, in the next slide, I just want to talk about a note on what the gender and caste numbers look like within the Indian population. So about 52% of the population is male and about 26 is upper caste. Now we've defined upper caste here as excluding SC, ST and OBC. In the next slide, we look at how this gender and caste representation looks in the police force in reality. We're using the police here as a proxy and not data from all our law enforcement agencies. But what we see about the police data, which also our friends over at CHRI, the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, have helped us aggregate, is that 91% of officers are male and 53% are upper caste. So now, in the next slide, if we come to what the actual representation in the characters are, we see that 95% are male and 59% are upper caste. In the next slide, what we've done is looked at these numbers just for the senior officers. And here now the caste percentage gets a little skewed. If we move to the next slide, what we can see, if we put these three numbers side by side, is that for gender or for caste, the police on ground and law enforcement characters on screen are quite close, but both are far from the reality of the population. If we come to slide 16, the analysis went further to look at the representation of who is telling these crime and courtroom drama stories. We coded for the caste and the gender of the writers, directors, and the actors of these 56 movies that we were looking at on Law and Order. If we skip to the next one, we see that 89% are male and 84% are upper caste. In the next one, we see that 95% are male and 88% are upper caste. And finally, in the slide about the actors, we see that 92% are male and 79% are upper caste. Again, in the slides as we go forward, if you look at this comparison side by side, they're quite a way away from the makeup of the population. So these were some of the numbers that we wanted to present to give you an idea of what representation on screen looks like when it comes to Law and Order. The question particularly about gender and caste that intrigued us, if we just go to the last slide, is that the question is about who is telling these stories and about who. If we're not making space for other genders and marginalized castes in the real world or on screen, we're excluding them out of all our stories. Young girls don't grow up seeing people like them being police officers on the streets or on the screens. The reality is that if you're a Dalit or Muslim or a minority at a police station, you're likely to get treated differently, and that goes on then without a debate. Why these structural differences exist have many reasons, but this data is to establish that equality is neither a part of our reality nor of our fantasy. With that, I'd like to switch back now to our panel conversation with Rema and Hussain, and we'll reflect on some of our findings there. Again, if anybody in the audience has questions on any of this data, the presentation or for the panelists, please do leave them in the question box below, and we'll address them at the end. So we'll start now with our panel, and Rema, I'd like to come to you, for the first question. First off, I'm a big fan of your work and your philosophy of policing. When I read about your work, either in your Times of India blog or on your Twitter, for me, it's firsthand access into what the life of a cop is. The cops that we see on screen tend to fall into certain buckets, right? The righteous cop, the corrupt cop, or the superhero or vigilante cop. How do these on-screen portrayals compare to the reality of the police and policing in India?
Thank you, Anushka. That was very generous of you. And I'm really honored that you do follow my work. I am a big fan of your work too, because I think Civic Studios is probably one of the well-organized projects which studies about how policing is done at all levels. If you look at how the police organizations function in India, the one thing which has been greatly ignored all these years is to study about ourselves, do a little bit of research on ourselves so that there can be some substantial change brought into different police organizations. So thank you so much for the work that you do, and thank you Newslaundry for having me a part of this conversation. I totally concur with you. On the fact that the way cops are depicted on screen have a massive influence on the way people look at us. Now let's take a look at the movies that fall in the league of 100 crore movie clubs. The old ones, the recent ones, and the new age cinema. All those popular films, they have normalized police brutality on screen. And I think film industries across the globe had developed a certain prototype about how cops are to be depicted on screen. Larger than life, very macho, super fit, moves like a ninja, and he can easily throw like a couple of baddies into thin air with a lot of ease. And his or her concern for the people is beyond imagination, that he or she wouldn't mind breaking the law here and there in order to deliver instant justice. The irony here is that if you look at the police manuals of different police organizations, our core responsibility is to uphold and enforce law impartially, to protect life, liberty, human rights, and dignity of the people, to prevent crime, and to ensure public order. But if you look at the prototype, which the movie industry is offering to the public at large, what is our core responsibility? Our core responsibility is to go after the bad guys, our core responsibility to seek revenge, and our core responsibility is to deliver instant justice in the most brutal manner. And this is the underlying trouble with public perception of police officers on screen. And coming back to what exactly happens in the routine lives of police officers across the ranks, not just senior police leadership, but also until the cutting edge level where we talk about the police constable officers or the police home guard officers. Everybody works 24 by 7. Everybody. I mean, if everything is normal, then yes, they do have a certain time frame where they come to the police station, deliver a certain responsibility, and they go back home. But if you look at an average police officer, everybody is technically on the job 24 by 7. And when there is a crisis, when there is a law and order problem, when there is a VIP movement, when there is a major festival going on, which is like almost every second day in India, given the cultural fabric and social fabric we have in this country, every second day there is something happening, some sort of a protest, some sort of festival, some sort of a major meetings. And you take the recent example of COVID. I think police officers have been at the forefront fighting the pandemic since March. Like I've seen in my district that I don't remember a single police officer requesting for a leave, even for a single day. And in the process, almost over 100 police officers from my unit, they tested positive. Luckily, we didn't have any loss of life, but in a lot of other districts, a lot of police officers died fighting the pandemic. So um, the realistic depiction of police officers on screen is a distant dream for us. I don't think any filmmaker would take that risk of showing what we are, because I don't think people will be interested in watching what we actually do. And I don't dispute the fact that there are certain black sheeps in the department, within the fraternity. And if you look at the collective imagination and the collective criticism that comes from the population about how cops are behaving in this country, you're only looking at the black sheeps. That's probably 1% of the entire force. You are ignoring the amazing work that is being done by the 99% of the police officers who die, who give their lives at the line of duty. So I think the need of the hour is to have responsible cinema. Filmmakers should probably come up with more movies. And I was a little happy, that now that we have OTT platforms, so a lot of budding filmmakers and movies which are made with a small budget, they have a lot of freedom to come up with movies, and they'll be able to project the reality of the Indian police. But unfortunately, the series, look, be it Netflix or Amazon Prime, you watch any of these series, it's all about glorifying violence. It's all about extreme measures. It's all about extreme form of brutality. And I think that has a huge audience. But if you show, what exactly happens within the police force and how the police community relationships works, I don't think, they have any audience for that. So we really need to, work. I think a lot of studies need to be done. And in the department also, I completely agree that, we need to go for major police reforms. We need to heavily invest for training our police officers on sensitivity and empathy, and bring in a massive behavioral change.
Thank you. That's very helpful to hear. Just out of curiosity, is there any movie or TV show that you think has done a good job of its depiction, or a half good job?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I watch almost all shows and movies which are made on the police officers. I am yet to come across a movie which will give a realistic picture of what we are. Let me give a very small example. It might come across as a very silly example. If you look at the insignia, I mean, in the police hierarchy, there are different ranks, and each rank has a certain insignia, right? The shoulder badge that we wear, the cap that we wear, the emblem that we have on the cap. I mean, there are movies where somebody who wears the insignia of an inspector general of police is on the streets thrashing baddies and getting into a massive crowd, and he's into all these actions and really action-packed drama. That doesn't happen. An inspector general never goes into the streets and thrashes people. I mean, for that matter, even the inspectors, they don't do it on a daily basis. These are like really extreme cases. These are exceptions. But that is which is mainstreamed in the movie. So how much time will it take for a filmmaker to do a little bit of research and to project what is what? I think this is about laziness. People are so lazy to probably sit down and do some research and show it as it is.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because we had done a previous conversation, a month or so ago with two directors, and they had mentioned the same thing, that a lot of the custodial violence on screen is more because of lazy writing than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, yeah. Hussain, lovely to have you back in this discussion, from our crime and punishment event a while ago. Your last book, your latest book, Endgame, is coming out, and I think we'll be playing the book trailer first, and then continuing with our questions with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anushka. Monster Endgame. Find him! Just let me go. Run.
Circuit card for a parking problem.
We're in the end game now.
Then you're one of the foremost, crime writers of India, and most of your books have been converted into successful films, right? Whether it's Black Friday or Shootout at Vadala, which was based on your writing, or this year Class of '83 that came out on Netflix, and I think there's the upcoming Gangubai Kathiawadi with Alia Bhatt in it. How, in your opinion, has police portrayal in popular culture and on screen changed since the days of Iftikhar and Jagdish Raj?
Well, I think I'll agree with Rema that 99% of the films, she said, I think all the films have portrayed cops very wrongly. So today we don't trust policemen. We don't look at them that they are honest people. And whenever we go to police, we are least expecting of them to be helpful to us. So I think all has happened because of the movie that they have influenced us. As I mean, we get a lot of it only from cinema. That's being a powerful medium. But also, if you look at the news reports, I mean, you will not see a single news report which will tell you the positive work done by the cops. So my whole point is whether the police are really working positively at all, or if at all they work, then it's not reported for us that we can know their good work. So not just cinema. I think in reality, it is very rare to find a very good, hardworking, or a very clean, non-corrupt cop. So I don't know whether we have to maybe really invent a cinema or we have to really make a movie where we can show the reality. Uh, I don't know. I'll have to ask Rima if she has seen Black Friday or if she has seen Mardani, because I tried to ensure that we try to be very close to the reality in Black Friday as well as in Mardani first, the first Mardani, not the second one. So I think in those both the places we have seen, except for the action scenes of the woman cop in Mardani movie, I think most of it we're trying to show the real side, the factual side of the cops, and the portrayal, the way they were talking to the informant network and other stuff. So I think in those both the places we have seen, except for the action scenes of the woman cop in Mardani movie, I think most of it we are trying to show the real side, the factual side of the cops and the portrayal, the way they were talking to the informant network and other stuff. Now, I think when we had MN Singh as Mumbai Police Commissioner, he was the first to take offense here, and he said that there should be a policeman in the censor board who can really try to give instructions about how police should be projected. And if similar such uh, measures are taken where we can try to have a correct protection, because I saw a movie recently where I saw a cop who is chewing pan, giving expletives, and very clearly and openly taking money from the people. I'm saying if today young kids will grow up, teenagers will grow up seeing this image of cop, what will they think about khaki? What will they think about policemen? So something has to be done about our new generation, because unless otherwise they are going to have very bad opinion of the police, which is not the case in other countries. When we have gone there, we say they have so much regards and respect for the police people.
Yeah. Rema, do you want to
Yeah,
respond?
I have something to add to the media reportage point that Mr. Hussain just made. In Telangana, state police is doing a tremendous job ever since the state was formed in 2014. The government has invested heavily in terms of modernizing and bringing in technology into the police force, and we are heavily promoting the concept of people-friendly policing in the state. So the current Director General of Police, he has roped in professionals to train the public relation officers in each police unit, so that they are able to identify the good work done by the police officers, and which is passed on to the media and social media on a routine basis, so that the right kind of images sent into mainstream media. Let me tell you something. Like, I have a public relations officer in my office, my PRO, for the past 3 years. Every time there is a good detection, every time the police officers go out of the way to crack a case, or they go, to different parts of the country to get a gang, and they get a dreaded criminal, and we do send a note to the media. And if you look at if you look at the weekly average, say if you are sending 15 notes in a week to the newspapers, of the 15 reports that we send, barely you will see one or two reports getting reported in the media, and they don't make into page one or page two or page three. It'll be somewhere in the corner, a small box, where they talk about, a case ending up in conviction, or, a police officer cracking a case. You don't see that kind of welcoming approach from the media houses to write about the positive and the good work done by the police officers, because I think people don't want to read about it because of the perception which has been ingrained in the minds of the people over so many years, that cops are bad, cops are bad. I mean, within my own family, I find it really hard to convince my family members that no, we are not bad. Just because I'm wearing a uniform, I'm not a bad person. Every day I get into fights, with my family members, trying to explain to them that no, not every cop is a bad cop. And why now, like, you add social media to the whole thing. Now, social media, like Mr. Hussain was just mentioning, that there are certain incidents. I'm not saying these are not happening. Like Anushka was just making a mention of a video which is going viral this morning. A cop is like probably dragging physically disabled men, and now with the power of social media, such videos or such images, they go viral within a fraction of a second. And if you look at the videos of good deeds, yes, they do get some sort of traction, but they don't stay in the social media for a very long time. But whereas a bad act, a bad deed, that stays for a very longer time. It becomes part of the muscle memory of the digital space. So I think people also, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not an authority to talk about the cognitive side of the population, but I do think that people don't really want to read a lot about the good work. Okay, it's so very difficult to catch the imagination of public by infusing about the community work done by police officers. Like, I've seen what my boys did during COVID. There are so many instances, especially when the migrant laborers, when they were walking home, most of my inspectors went out of the way. They paid from their own pockets. They established shelters. They established food banks on the highways. I didn't have to tell them. They did it on their own. And they paid money from their own pockets. And nobody talks about it. I mean, you will not see stories like these in the media. So that is a very problem. Yeah.
Hussein, why do you think that as you've worked in journalism and in, so closely with the film community where your books are adapted, why do you think we have this overarching negative portrayal? Is it because the audience doesn't want to see positive stories? Do negative stories make for better, juicier storytelling?
I will just try to say something about what Rema said about good work being done in her district. My point is that again, that would be a very rare thing. That would be very one of those very few good instances that must have happened, which has gone unreported, or I think maybe her officers did not work hard for people to know about those things. Otherwise, if the way media goes out after negative things, if the way the cops are doing good detection and investigations, if those things are even highlighted, I think much of our negative impressions about the police will get rectified. The whole thing is that we like to see bad guys, and the whole thing is that where a certain thought has been implanted in our head that people or men in uniform are rarely good people. They are always siding with bad people, or they become the instruments of injustice or tyranny by the say corrupt politicians or the say villains shown in the movies. Now, my whole thing is that if even you see that you have movies, say you mentioned Simba or other movies, where you have seen a guy who's finally taking up the cause of the downtrodden or the weak people. Even then, he's shown as a guy who was corrupt guy who didn't have any problem in dealing with these peoples, and later on he had a change of heart and he tried to become a good guy. So my point is that can't we get a thought, or we get a breed of officers right from the beginning, maybe I mean through cinema, or maybe through some kind of media exercise, or maybe some kind of awareness program that can be generated by the police of the various states, where this whole taint of the cops or about they having bad name, or they be branded as bad guys, corrupt guys, unhelpful guys. I think it will take some time, but if such a campaign is kind of launched through these mediums, as I said, maybe newspapers, television, and other stuff, maybe in time we can succeed. So then what can happen is that perhaps as a citizen of this country, we can say bad guys and good guys. We'll be able to distinguish between them. And I think apart from all this, police, city police or state police having these anti-corruption bureaus, they should have certain, as she said, some PROs. We also have PROs in Mumbai police and other places. We should be have access to grievances. If I mean, I know so many cases where poor they go to police station, they get shooed away, they get scolded, while rich people their complaints are heard. I am so aware of so many cases where people are not getting justice, but those who are like trying to be bad to people, they are getting away with it because they cannot go and register the grievances with a certain police cell or police officer. So what happens is that the people who are going through all this injustice and oppression, they will always remain like that, while those people who can misuse the police machinery by paying some money or using their influence, they will always have an upper hand. So, like a anti-corruption bureau, they should have a grievance cell where citizens should be allowed to go and lodge their complaints and seek redressal of those grievances through these forums. I think then slowly, maybe the impression will change. May not be overnight or maybe in soon, but in some time it will happen, I guess.
Okay, got it. Rema, what is the impact of this portrayal that both you and Hussain are talking about, the negative portrayal on screen? What's the impact of that on your day-to-day work? Like you were saying, the officers you work with do go out of their way, are really helpful to the community around. Does the feedback loop of the negative portrayal affect your work on ground in any way?
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me give you a very small example because this is also a very popular example which is used against the police officers in mainstream media. Let's take the case of the 498A IPC cases. I'm talking about the domestic violence cases. The couple who come to the police stations, most of the time they do not want to go for registration of FIR. I mean, I'm talking about the victim, a lady who walks into the police station. She doesn't want to go for registration of FIR straight away because I'm posted in a very rural district, and most of these women, they are not financially independent. They cannot afford to walk out of a marriage. So what they expect from the police officers is that you talk to the husband, do teen thappad maro, give him a tight slap, and do a couple of rounds of counseling and make sure that we are reunited and he doesn't resort to physical and mental abuse again. So this is their basic request. And there have been cases where the husband have been excessively abusive, and we want to register a case. And I've seen the inspector literally pleading with the lady that please let us go for a case, because here in this case counseling is not going to help, because if you look at how the history of violence, it is better to register a case, and at some later point, if he mends his ways and if you want to compromise, there is always an option of compromising in the code of law, right? But no, even in cases where the lady has been brutally beaten and but she's hospitalized and there is consistent violence against the lady and the children, the women say, no, you just keep him in lockup for 3 days and then you let him go. I don't want to go ahead with the case. And then we make her understand that, okay, it's better to register a case, because if he doesn't stop, at some point the case will come up for trial and he will be convicted in the code of law and he will go to jail. So you will have some, you will be free from the abuse. They don't want, because like there are days when I sit with these ladies and I try to explain it to them, and then I ask them, why do you think only beating your husband for 2 days is going to help? Because he has a history of violence. That's not going to help you. And even cases where the women, they have filed for divorce, they come to the police station asking us for a case, they don't want to go ahead with the case. They want us to compromise and mediate in the police station, because they think that justice is going to be so slow, it's going to be time consuming, and they do not have the financial support or the emotional support from the immediate family to fight the case for such a long time in the code of law. So for them, it's like police is like, we are the face of instant justice, because that's what they see on the movies. That's what they are being told in the society, that police station leke jao, do teen thappad maro, sudhar jayega. But that is not what we are. That's not what we are expected to do. So in the process, what happens? The inspector is like, he looks at the plight of the woman and he keeps him there. I'm not disputing the fact that they don't slap. I mean, there are cases where they slap the abusive husbands, and then they try to do like multiple rounds of counseling, and he's allowed to go back with the female. And then after a few days, she comes back to the police station, and the same story is repeated. So what you see on screen, especially for people living in tier 2 cities, small towns and villages, what they see on screen has a massive influence on how they perceive the criminal justice system. So unless and until we do something about it, I mean, we are not like the Western countries where young kids are taught in the primary school about how the criminal justice system works. In the United States, I have seen like primary school children are taken to the police station. They are taken and they are told and educated how the whole system around 9/11 works. So even a young kid, if she finds or he finds herself in any sort of trouble, they immediately pick up the phone, they call 9/11. We don't have that kind of a system where we teach the children or teach the society about how the criminal justice system works. And given the size of the population, there are a lot of challenges in terms of speeding up trial in the courts of law. I do understand that it is a big problem that the country faces, that our criminal justice system is slightly slow, but the population is also massive. And we need to invest heavily in institutions, resources, both manpower, but also all other resources which are required. And it's going to take time. And we are making a lot of improvements. I mean, people don't talk about it. The media doesn't report about it. But if you look at how institutions have improved over a period of time, especially in the last 10 years, it's really amazing. So I'm sure there will be change. I mean, I'm not very pessimistic about it. I'm very optimistic about it.
That's great to someone's working inside the system to have that attitude. That's interesting to hear how that feedback loop works. Hussain, have you found that your books or movies, once they're converted, have a certain feedback loop with the cops themselves? Your books show them in a good light and a challenging light. It's quite varied. What has been the reaction of the police themselves to your books and writing, particularly because it puts so much of this behind the scenes information out in the public domain?
See, what happens what happens is that actually what you see on the screen is much different than what is written in the book. And a director normally takes creative liberties and licenses to enhance the viewing pleasure. So he kind of fictionalizes, but add a lot of dramatization in the process. So what you see is actually not those facts written in the books. For example, even if you see maybe in class of 83 and or even early shooter Gudala, you see the cops are shown very different. They have no qualms in shooting the people dead. They have no respect for the authority. Now, this is what is not written in the books. So naturally, those police officers about whom it was written, they have a huge resentment over the way they have been portrayed on the screen. And what happens is that it results as if they think that I was responsible for their portrayal, wrong portrayal on the screen. So all the anger is misdirected at me. And then you see a lot of people talking and like expressing their displeasure, while I don't think I should be blamed for that wrong portrayal of misrepresentation on the screen.
You're saying that there's a lot of loss of research and accuracy between book to film.
Well, I mean, as I said, that once I objected to one of my filmmaker friends. I said, "Why are you showing this on the screen?" He said, "So you don't know. I mean, you have written a book, but it's my 50 crore which is riding on the movie, and I have to recover this. So unless I don't show it in this manner, the audience will not approve of it, and then I will have to face the loss. I mean, which is why I have to do this." So he kind of said that he's bowing down to the market pressures and the popular viewing of the cinema.
I find that interesting because your books do really well by themselves, right? There seems like there is an audience who's willing to read police procedurals or law enforcement procedurals. Why do you think that we don't have good, procedural representation of that kind on screen? Or why do you think that the media community feels like that won't work?
No, I don't know because as I said, that it's all because the directors are afraid that that kind of stark and that kind of very clear and blunt portrayal of a cop on the screen may not go down well with the people. So they have to show a cop who is very abusive, who's very belligerent, aggressive, and is ready to break the laws and become unconventionally, direct about taking action. So I mean, this is what I have seen my experience of meeting at least half a dozen filmmakers, that they are very cagey about the correct or factual presentation of a cop. So, which is why I think that maybe there has to be some awareness campaign or some kind of effort to ensure that the cops, I mean, the filmmakers think differently.
Hmm. Rema, when we were looking at the presentation, some of the data in that, particularly around female representation, right? It said that the police force has 9% of women and the on-screen portrayal has about 5%. Both are low compared to, the 48% of women in our population. What are the consequences of not mirroring this actual population divide either in the force or on screen?
Well, I think the very argument behind increasing the representation of female officers in the forces in India is that the police force has to represent both the sections. We are talking about 50% of the population. So when you need a police force which needs to cater to 50% of the population which is female, and you're looking at a figure which is less than 10%, and that's a massive gap. So we need to address that gap if you want to be very inclusive, if you want to be very representative of the population you are representing. One. Number two, about the depiction on screen. Um, let's talk about that 5% you just spoke about. 5% of female police officers who are projected in different movies. How are they? How are they projected? I work in a Telugu speaking state, and some Telugu commercial movies had popular heroines like Vijay Shanti, who is a politician now. She had acted in a lot of female cop movies. You watch all those movies, and I have not come across a single movie where she is projected as projected in a manner which depicts the realistic side of a female police officer. In all the movies, she's extremely macho, she's extremely manly, she's extremely aggressive, and she's as good or sometimes more good as her male counterparts in terms of dealing with the bad guys. And that's not how it is, right? And if you look at the senior police leadership, about the roles and responsibilities. Dealing with the bad guys is not the only thing that we do. I, as the district police chief, I have hundreds of responsibilities. My job is not only to deal with the bad guys. I spend hours and hours together in my office taking care of the administrative work. We do recruitment, we do training, we take care of a lot of service matters, we do a lot of community-based activities, and then we also do crime detection and prevention. And there are different ranks and there are different officers to take care of each aspect of policing. But the way it is being projected on screen, it's all about dealing with the bad guys. It's all about delivering instant justice. So this will definitely impact how people look at police officers. And now let's take a case. Let's take the case of a young girl, a 21-year-old girl, probably coming from a small town, and she aspires to become a police officer. She aspires to become an Indian police service officer, or maybe a DSP or an inspector. She looks at these movies, and what is the kind of perception her family has? They will think that, oh, this is not a woman's job, this is a man's job. And if you're that aggressive, if you're going to be that manly, you may never find a proper partner for marriage. And you will always remain single. So in small towns, this kind of projections, they have a lot of impact on how women look at joining the forces. So at the time of recruitment, I had to literally deploy a team which went around the villages, conducting cultural programs, explaining about, explaining about the realistic aspect of policing in order to, encourage these young women to apply for the police constable jobs. And even after joining the police department, if you look at the nature of duties where female police officers are deployed, most of them prefer to work in desk jobs, in receptions, and as a writer. I'm talking about the lower ranks, and at the leadership position also. Not now things are changing, but traditionally, if you look at how female police officers have preferred to work, they would rather prefer to work in a non-law and order assignment than a law and order assignment because of various factors. So the projection on screen definitely has an impact, in the field, and this has to change.
Yeah.
And I think it merits a longer discussion. I cannot really talk about it, in few minutes. Yeah.
I almost can't believe we're at the end of the session because I feel like we've barely even scratched the surface of the surface. But the one reference which I think, is probably on everyone's mind who's listening to this is Delhi Crime, the show that was on Netflix, and also the movie Sony by Ivan Iyer. I don't know if either of you have seen Delhi Crime or Sony, but if you have, do you have any thoughts on what the representation that looked like? Because it to the lay viewer, it looks quite different from what we see, in the regular movies.
I haven't seen either of it, so I will not be able to comment on it.
Okay. Rema, have you got either of these?
I've seen, and again, it's the same. I mean, they have tried their level best to depict what it was, but then a lot of things are not what it is. That is why I think that for you to have good cop movies, you need to be really hardworking. You can't be a lazy filmmaker and yet come up with a good cop movie, because I think projecting violence is much more easier than doing hardcore research and come up with the realistic movies on police officers. So, yeah.
Any last comments from either of you before we wrap up? I've been told that we're not going to take a Q&A because I think we started a little bit later. But any last comments from either of you that you'd like to tell, either filmmakers, writers who might be in the audience listening, any advice on how the portrayal can change going forward?
Me?
Then you want to start and we can wrap up with Rema.
I think I've all said almost everything about creating awareness. I mean, having some kind of sensitization program, some kind of effort that is made in letting the masses know, and maybe something that can be done at the school and college levels by having some kind of interaction with the cops and the police force, where our students are made to be aware of that what exactly is the reality, what a police force is doing. As Rima rightly said, that apart from law enforcement and crime detection, they also do so many things. I really remember vividly when there was flooding in Mumbai. And I've seen police officers that how they've gone all out and done such dedicated and selfless work, trying to help the citizens, fighting the flood in Mumbai. So I agree that those things have gone totally unacknowledged generally, what police people do. So I mean, I think that those things should be highlighted in some way. I don't know how police are going to tackle that, but yes, that's the need of the hour. That should be done.
Yeah. Yeah. Rema, any last comments from you?
Yeah, I think I'd like to reiterate a very valid statement which was made by Anushka in the beginning. You stated that one of the most important findings of the study was that low trust in public institutions will lead to low participation, low civic participation, right? So, and I think movie makers have a big responsibility to come up with responsible cinema, which will depict police officers as they are. So my last word is that please let us go for responsible cinema. And you also made another point that the censor board probably should have a police. I think Mr. Hussain made this point that the censor board should have a police officer who will sit with a team and see if this is the reality or not. And this kind of small changes will probably work in the long run. And yes, we need a lot of awareness. We need to bring the focus from the bad guys to the good guys eventually. And I'm sure that will go a long way in the public perception of police officers in the
I
country.
am willing to offer all my help in whatever Rima or Telangana police need to be done. I mean, for helping out in the process. So I'm there as a volunteer if
Thank
you
you
need
so
any
much.
help from me.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much.
A fantastic note to end on, because I think part of what better representation will look like is closer, in some sense, conversations between filmmakers and media makers and the police and our public institutions themselves, so that there's better understanding, there's better access into stories that can be both compelling and constructive without resorting to violence as the reason to engage with it. So thank you both so much for this. It's been extremely useful. I think it leaves us with many questions about, what is the morality around making any of these responsible portrayals of our police and public institution. There can't be a mandate around it, but I think if we do think of entertainment as an active part of that fourth pillar of the media, then it leaves us with some sense of, as content creators, that you have a role to play in this democracy, whether you like it or not, because of the power that you have.